Hello, welcome to the channel Flesh to the Father. Today I'm going to point out my plan for Christian law. This follows on from my video yesterday about how I would reform Christianity. So if you haven't seen that video, go back and watch it. And today I have 10 steps to implement Christian law. Let's go. Okay, the first point and the most important point obviously is the spiritual side of life. That would be the most important side of life rather than say money and success. The most important thing that the society would push towards is spiritual awakening, spiritual service, spiritual connection, and a brotherhood and sisterhood between all people. And the main focus would be serving the Father, following Christ's example, and promoting spiritual values in society rather than the fleshly values. And this system will give people freedom. This is not some kind of forceful, extreme religious views or communist where they force stuff on you and you have no freedom, you feel like you're being suffocated. It gives people freedom just as God gives people freedom to choose, but it will promote good values, just like the Bible verse says, you are called to be free, but use your freedom to serve one another in love rather than your fleshly sinful desires. So number one is we'll promote spiritual and Christian values first and foremost. Okay, number two, we'll have a new monetary system. Our current fiat system is outdated and also corrupt. And what we'll do, it's actually coming into force now, is we will adopt a new currency that has limited supply. So for example, Bitcoin is the perfect example of how it will work. Bitcoin has only 21 million coins, so it's a limited supply. It's actually deflationary, or it gains more value over time because people lose their coins, etc. And what that means is, because there's no interest gaining over time or it loses value, you can give loans for free, you can give mortgages for free, and I would also ban usury. So there'd be no way for banks to offer out loans with interest because it's immoral. And if you actually look into all the religions, it's actually a sin in all religions. Despite what some people think, even in Judaism, it's a sin to have usury. And this would just make for a much fairer society. So for an example, the classic one is a mortgage. If you want to buy a home for £250,000 or dollars, you go to the bank, they press a button on the screen, and you end up paying probably about £600,000 back over 25 years, purely because the interest rates and the currency devalues. But with something like Bitcoin, or if you had central bank digital currencies with a limited supply and you banned governments from printing, or even if you had gold-backed currencies, then you would be able to give loans and not have to worry about the interest rates. So immediately people's mortgages payments would be cut probably 50 to 60%. They'd be saving that money. And what it would always do, or also do, it would encourage governments to actually solve problems, and we'd promote people who are actually competent rather than incompetent losers we have now, because they wouldn't be able to print money. Whenever we have any problems in the world, as we saw with COVID, the government's only answer is to print more money. But it's sort of like a gambling addict or a drug dealing child drug dealing adult who always has to seek their parents' money. So, oh, bail me out, bail me out, bail me out, when the child becomes weaker and weaker and weaker rather than stronger by having to overcome their problems. So we get a two-pronged attack. So people would have more money, we'd have less corruption in the banks, and also our politicians would be able to do a better job because they'd actually have to be competent rather than the incompetent losers that we currently have. Okay, number three, we would completely change the healthcare system, and it would focus on the cause of actual health problems. So for an example, cancer, instead of just treating the cancer, we'd have more studies and more education on what is the cause of cancer and then prevent cancer. So for an example, I'm aware that if people do 3-day fasts, that kills a load of the cancerous cells that are very early stages building up, because the body goes into autophagy and it gets rid and burns up the very weak cells, such as the cancer cells. So I may not be completely correct on that, but that's one idea. And we would focus on natural treatments and sort of like the Ayurveda that the Indians and the Hindus use. That's very much focused on natural treatments and more spiritual treatments. And we combine that with our Western methods that are good, such as the technology and all of that other stuff, and brilliant operations that we can provide. And they would be the two ways to completely revolutionize the health industry. And I'd also crack down on big pharmaceutical companies, and we'd move away from pills for everything. That's just to keep the big pharmaceutical companies rich. and all the other stuff we saw over the last few years. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know what I'm talking about. We wouldn't have all that nonsense. Okay, number 4, I would completely reform the education system. Our current education system is completely soulless. I think it was mainly built for the Industrial Revolution, and it just creates cogs in a system. They just want you to go through school, do your tests, and then go into the workforce and get money and be part of that system. It's completely soulless. And I remember being in school, it was always incredibly boring, and it felt like my soul was being suffocated. Whereas school should be a place that kids love going to and the teachers love going to. And I would move the education system. The main focus would be Christian and spiritual values and creating wonderful human beings rather than cogs for a system. I won't be too worried about intelligence. I would be worried about it, but it wouldn't be the main focus. The main focus would be spiritual values and spiritual progression of the students and creating wonderful human beings for society. And they would only need basic education in terms of good maths, good English, good science, learn your geography, learn the maps. You need all the good basic stuff that I actually enjoyed when I was really young in school. But as I got older, into sort of 12 years old, it just seemed like a load of rubbish. And that's why once kids get to say 10, 11, 12, they're allowed to explore their creative side. So some kids will have natural passion for farming or business or sports or health or law or geography or traveling. Kids will naturally find things they're interested in, and they'd be allowed to explore those avenues and self-teach rather than being forced into just sitting at a desk all day being bored out their brains. And for an example, I remember studying religion in school and it was so boring, but I believe that I actually have a natural passion for theology and philosophy and religion. But if I was allowed to discover it myself and had, say, a teacher such as myself who could make it interesting and understandable and more fun, then I would have loved it. But if you just sat at a desk writing in a book, copying off a board, sort of how religion just teaches the Bible, is soulless and boring and it doesn't feed the spirit. I would be feeding the spirit and allowing the students to feed their spirits. And it would be a wonderful school to attend and kids would love it and the teachers would love it. Okay, number 5, I would have strict law and order. This is basically the complete reverse of what we have today in our world, where there's virtually no law and order. And it would be a society where the criminals are afraid rather than the innocent, or the criminals are not protected, the innocent are protected. Everything in our world at the moment is backward, where criminals are almost protected. I think you even saw that guy in Australia who stabbed the Christian preacher. He'd already stabbed someone 6 months earlier. It's like, well, if you stab someone, you go in prison for a long, long time. Under my laws, even if you're caught carrying a knife, you'd get 20 years in prison, because the idea of anyone even carrying a knife is absolutely ridiculous. So the punishment for crime would be harsh because if you have harsh punishments, people will not do it. And I would also reform the prisons. So when people do go to prison, they would be reformed into better characters rather than just chucking them in there to denigrate. And that's what prisons were supposed to do. So the prisoners who go in, if you've got a young lad who's had a tough life and he's caught shoplifting and let's say he's got a couple of years in prison or whatever he's got, in there you'd have spiritual masters working with them, understanding and helping them heal from their trauma of their childhood and building them up to be ready to go back into society. And actually had a pretty good idea in terms of before they're allowed into proper society, you could almost use the 15-minute city idea. So they go to prison initially, and then once they progress, you're allowed into a 15-minute city. And then once you've proved yourself in the 15-minute city, then you are allowed back into the world. Now, obviously, the idea of 15-minute cities for your regular people that are trying to be imposed on us is absolutely ridiculous. But I do think it's a good way for criminals, rather than just being stuck in prison, denigrating. The ones who do, say, petty crimes would be allowed in the 15-minute cities, and then you have to prove that you can be added to normal society. And this is better than our current system, because I think under our current system, a lot of people can go into prison and become worse. It's my understanding that a lot of kind of extremist Muslim gangs run the prisons. So you'll have someone who goes for a fairly petty crime and they'll turn into a radical Islamist, come out and cause a lot of trouble on the streets and become a real danger to society. So we're actually making our criminals worse rather than reforming them, making them better so they can go back into society and become a force for good rather than a force for evil. Okay, number 6, we would have a spiritual council of elders and spiritual masters and wise spiritual teachers who lead society rather than our politicians. Now, if you look at our world at the moment, it's not just the politicians, actually, it's the people above the politicians, such as the central bankers and people who gain financial wealth who are able to make politicians their puppets. So instead of having these people selfishly running society for their own needs, the spiritual council of elders would work for a fixed wage, so they have no financial interest, and they would guide and push society in Christ values and Christian values rather than selfish values, and they would oversee things. So if there's corruption and politicians who are not fulfilling the needs of the people, they would have the powers to remove them. And I'm aware that everybody's open to corruption, but we'd have to put in measures to allow for the corruption. And I believe if you have true spiritual masters, they shouldn't really be corrupted. And you'd have a massive group of people so that if you just have one leader that's corrupt, then the others can get involved to remove them. And it sort of be like in the UK here, we have the royal family and the king actually has the most power. And so instead of having a royal family, I mean, we could still keep the royal family, but the spiritual elders would be given the powers that the royal family has. And I'm not necessarily against the royal family. I would still keep the royal family, but it's just an idea of who should be running society rather than our corrupt leaders right now. Okay, number 7, we'll promote traditional family values. So the traditional family would be pushed forward, and it's a traditional method of the family is run by God over Christ, Christ over man, man over woman, woman over children. And the traditional marriages would be the only marriage recognized. And again, people are free to live however they want. And some people may be born a certain way, that's fine. We're not going to persecute anyone, but we're going to promote the traditional family values and respect people's way of living their life how they want, but certain other ways of life will not be allowed to be promoted. We're only promoting traditional family values. And also the people who don't live that way, they're not going to have to worry about facing persecution, such as if they want to live their lifestyle, they're free to do that. We're not going to be throwing them off buildings or anything, but they simply will not be allowed to promote it. And I think even they will understand that as a healthy society, we should be promoting family values. As I know many people who live that lifestyle who actually agree that it should not be promoted and that family values should be promoted for a healthy society. Okay, number 8, this is a pretty important one. It's the agriculture industry and food production. We would focus on more local and organic farming and pushing healthy food rather than all our kind of crazy food we got today. And I understand it's hard. When we're living in a modern society, most of the food is quick, it's easy, but it's unhealthy. And we try and promote as much as we can healthy eating, healthy food. You know, help our farmers out who are being crushed at the moment. We'll promote our local farmers and get as much organic, homegrown produce as we can. And we try to move away from the takeaway food, the unhealthy food, which also puts a stress on our health system. And we'd encourage people to cook their own food, grow their own food, and then eat healthy food. And in the schools, they would learn about, again, this is going back to the school idea, the kids would learn how to grow their own food and how to cook their own food. So not only are they having fun, but they're learning better values rather than just eating rubbish. You know, get a can of Red Bull, sweets. They'd be learning, schools would have gardens where kids would grow their food, and then they'd learn how to make healthy smoothies, healthy dinners, healthy lunches. And as I've learned myself, the more you learn, you become passionate about it rather than just going along and grabbing any old rubbish to eat. And as I say, in our modern world, it's tough to eat healthy because we're bombarded with rubbish, and just out of ease of use and sort of bad addictions because we're sugar addicts. And I admit myself, I'm just as bad as anyone. But if we had a world that promoted healthier values and you didn't have ease of access to all this bad food, then people would naturally just turn away. And as I also have known from experience, that if you eat healthy for a certain period of time, you no longer have the cravings to eat so much rubbish. Okay, number 9, it would be charity. And that is basically what we have today, but without the corruption. So there's a lot of fantastic charities today, but a problem with a lot of them is they have become corrupt over time. And you see some charities, CEOs are getting paid like £250,000 a year, which is absolutely crazy to me. And as we've seen with many other charities, the corruption, people are always taking backhanders. You know, charities, 99% or 98% or 90% of the money should be going to the actual charity. And then you use a small amount to pay people who are doing the work, who deservedly need the pay. But these days, it's the opposite. It's like 10% of money goes to charity, 90% is backhanders and corruption. So we would keep the charity system as it is, but we would remove all the corruption and have harsher regulations on people who are corrupt. Okay, number 10, the final point is in business and everything else in sport, there'll be a focus on honor and values rather than just money, success, egotistical behavior, and winning under any means. Now, in our current world, it basically will screw other people over to become successful or to win. You see it in business and in sports. But under Christian law and in a Christian society, people would be more focused on having honor and values. And just an analogy would be in sports, I like to watch football and they're always cheating and diving because they're more obsessed with winning than values. When under true values, people have more focus on honor and values rather than winning. So for me, if I won a sporting event, but I knew in my heart that I cheated, I would not feel happy. Whereas in our world at the moment today, people don't care. As long as they win, they're happy. They don't care if they cheat and snidey and all that stuff. And it's the same in business. People, as long as they get rich, that's all they care about. They don't care about how they get rich or if they screw loads of people over. Their main goal is to become rich, materialism and egotism, rather than living with honor and values. And the true great people are the ones who come rich, but they do it with values and they also use their money to serve the communities. Okay, so that's my 10 points for Christian law. As I say, it was just a bit of fun, but it's not just Christian law. It's a vision of how I believe society should be run and functioned if you had spiritual, wise people running it, rather than, just the people focusing on money and fleshly, worldly desires. And this is what I believe. If people are reborn spiritually and we follow Christian laws, that would be Christ's kingdom of heaven on earth. Okay, so if you have any other ideas, please put them in the comments below. Like the video if you like the idea of Christian law. Subscribe for more, and God bless everyone. Goodbye.